Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining us today is another good friend of mine making her official narrator debut here on the show. A true nerd through and through, my guest's love for storytelling developed via tabletop gaming, live action roleplay, and reading stories to her children. Having met her husband at a LARP event many years ago, dressed up as characters and defeating monsters in the woods, they can now be found throwing banter back and forth in different accents at home, raising their little monsters to boot. As a stay-at-home mom, reading through book series after book series to her oldest son and maintaining character voices the whole way through, she thought this could be something more. And with many ups and downs and can I do it, she threw herself into the audio world, learning about decibels and plosives, audio peaks, and room tones, so you don't have to. And if you've seen the latest snippet I posted on my YouTube, I am so happy to have her on the show officially. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, my good friend, narrator Sami Ro. Sami, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, Sami. I'm so excited to have you here on the show and talk about so many things, especially some of the projects you have worked on, such as Ashes to Rubble. And you're currently working on what project at the moment that's up and coming?
It's called The Knowing Witch by M.M. Parks.
Nice, nice. So, as a little teaser for our viewers and listeners, without spoiling too much, what can you tell us about both projects?
So they are both fantasy based. Ashes and Rubble was a solo narration. It was a very travel town to town adventure narration. There were so many characters that I got to juggle in that. It's a fantastic story. A little bit about the story. Let's say that you decided you were going to go bounty hunt to get some cash, and
Mm-hmm.
you didn't realize that one of the trackers you hired was the person you were hunting.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay. I like it.
It was such a fun story, and it was really, really interesting too to voice a character who had like a duplicit character that way. Like he would disguise his voice down lower as he was, around these people, and then he would talk more in his natural voice when he wasn't. So coming up with like all of the characters plus him having essentially two voices was really interesting to do.
Nice, nice. And what about the current project that you have in the works? What about that series?
So this is going to be The Knowing Witch, and this one is actually going to be in a duet with
Ooh,
Damian Knight is
yeah.
the yeah. So he's my co-narrator, and this story is going to be very, very different for me because even though it is fantasy, I'm only voicing mostly the main girl. There's like maybe two other girls I think that make an appearance, but for the most part, I'm voicing one character versus in Ashes and Rubble that I just finished, I was voicing 20 plus, almost 30 characters. So it's going to be a different take. I'm kind of excited to let my voice rest a little bit and focus in this one character. But yeah, I think it's going to be really fun. This is about a girl who fell in love with a human. She's a witch, he's immortal. She
Hmm.
falls in love with him. He ends up going away and she doesn't see him again for a long time. And then later on, she gets kidnapped by some demons
Ooh,
and it leads to her and that guy reconnecting.
nice. Okay. So is it safe to say it's kind of like a romance fantasy or it has romance in it?
Yes. So, okay, I would say that this is a romantasy, knowing which is a romantasy. But, it's funny you bring it up because Ashes and Rubble, I did not think was going to end up with any romance in it, and it did. And that was
Ooh.
really fun because I don't know if the author really loves to call it a romantasy. I think maybe it is more of a fantasy with romance in it. But in my book, it's still a romantasy. So
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to talk to you about those projects and what you've learned from both. But before we get to those, let's talk a little bit more about you, Sammy. So, in your bio, you are a diehard fantasy lover too. I mean, from tabletop games, LARPing, and all that stuff. And from your bio, that's how you met your husband. So, what would you definitively say was your aha moment that really put you on this path of being a narrator? And do you remember the first book you were ever working on?
Okay, so I think my aha moment, it wasn't so much of a, how do I say this? I didn't come up with the idea super organically. I came
Mm,
across a narrator who was narrating live, and audiobook narration from the outside looking in when you don't know anything about it, it's one of
mhm.
those jobs of the, "Oh, how do you get into that? How did you do this?" Or, "Oh,
Ah,
only actors
okay.
or only people who are pursuing acting as a career and have gone to school for it and all of this can do that." But the narrator that I was watching, she was talking about how she used to be a school teacher, and
Mm,
someone had just recommended to her that maybe she should try it, and she did, and now does it full time. And I was like, "Wait a second." And then she talked about how she had a studio in her home, how, she got the equipment herself and she's able to work from home. And me as a stay-at-home mom, I was like, "Oh, hold on. That this could be doable. This might be a thing." I was already, like you said, I was reading to my son every night. We read through
mhm.
the whole Percy Jackson series. Uh, those are some long books for an
Yeah.
8-year-old, and so you have to, like, maintain the characters and everything to, like, really read through them and keep their attention. But, yeah, it with that idea and that realization that it was something that you can do from home, I called my husband, and I was like, "I have a crazy idea. Hear me out." So, we I ended up cleaning out one of my closets. I have a closet under my staircase that we had just stuff shoved
Right.
into, old coats, old costumes. We emptied it out. I put sound panels everywhere. I, got my mic, I got my setup, and I started teaching myself how to do the audio engineering. I literally sat probably in this closet for a good month before I recorded anything, to actually try to audition, just doing test sounds with my mic and figuring out how to read all of these different levels and what these different things were. What is RMS? What is
Mhm.
LUFS? What is a noise floor? And I kind of took myself to, like, my own little school in my studio. And then I started practicing auditioning. And, now here I am.
Awesome. That is really, really cool. Really, really fascinating. And that's going to lead into a whole slew of questions that I have for this amazing interview, Sammy. So, I guess as a little icebreaker to talk about the projects that you've been a part of, the two ones we'll be talking about in particular. So, when you sort of figured out this was the path that you wanted to pursue, typically, do you have a ritual or routine that you use to get you into the zone of being a narrator? Do you do like any vocal exercises? Do you do any sort of special things? Or ultimately, what does a day in the life look for you as a narrator?
So, okay, I think bringing up vocal exercises is a really great topic, real
Mhm.
quick, because I think that a lot of us think that a narrator is just reading a book, that we use our normal speaking voice and we just read it. And that's not true at all. The way I
No, it
talk
is not.
isn't the way I narrate. And
Mhm.
there's definitely finding that smooth spot in your voice for narration. Sometimes it's hard. I often I don't really do a vocal warm up. I sing random songs in my booth in between recording. Lately, it's been K-pop Demon Hunters. I've been singing Golden all the time in between takes in my booth. Um, I'm sure you've heard of K-pop Demon Hunters
Oh,
because the whole
yes.
internet has by now. But yeah, it's just, anything to stretch your voice, anything to, let it relax and get those muscles warmed up, but I don't necessarily do a certain regimen.
Hmm.
Um, as far as like what do I do to get my head into the space for narration? I don't know. My first step is always to read the book and get familiar with the story. But
Right.
then after that, it's really just getting down to work.
Absolutely. All right. All right. Now, in regards to, again, narration, what would you say is probably some of the most challenging aspects you encountered when you began during your initial stages of narration?
Mm, other than the engineering and the editing, because that was really hard. But I feel
Mm,
like everybody understands how and why that's hard. I think for me, another part that's challenging was getting used to, I don't want to say the embarrassment, but I don't have a better word for, having someone else hear your crazy voices. I'm a
right.
very, like, personal space person. I don't like to be perceived. So when I had to come out of my comfort zone and, you know, okay, I'm going to voice this burly Scottish man, and somebody else is going to hear it, and then maybe 100 other people are going to hear it. And that was like a big mental hurdle for people to hear like my monster voices and my masculine voices and things like that, and get comfortable with that was difficult.
Mm,
But I think I think now I guess after getting some feedback that people like it. People like to hear that. People, it brings a story to life and all of these things. I'm a lot more comfortable with it now. And I dare say I'm proud of it now. I love that I can bring so many different characters to life and, make the story breathe in a different way. And that's okay. It's like breaking out of my shell in a weird way.
absolutely. Absolutely true. And now, since you brought up the character voices, that leads into the next question. So, as you said earlier in the interview just now for Ashes to Rubble, you voiced quite a few characters. In fact, many characters. So, how do you go about making each character voice feel complex but also authentic to the character and also the world that they're a part of? Because I would imagine it can be very intimidating to voice many characters and remember their specific voices.
Okay, so I have a couple things on my mind about this. One is if, I find myself in a book that has 7 or 8 characters, I feel like I can pretty well handle that and I can pretty well read each character to figure out what they should sound like. But when
Mm,
we went with a book like Ashes and Rubble, I looked at my character list and how many characters there were and considered characters that maybe weren't even on the list. And I messaged my author and I said, listen, there are a lot of voices here. We need to assign some sort of dialects or accents to help me break up these characters, or we're going to struggle with having them sound different. So
mm,
in this book, we had humans, we had elves. Those were the two main types of people in the book, but there were also
mm,
orcs and there were other things. Um, the elves were all royalty. And so I suggested, can we give these elves more of a British, like the higher class elves, can they have like a British RP accent? And he was like,
right.
oh, sure, sure. And I was like, what do you think about giving these humans like a Southern? And he
Ooh.
was like, oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it worked out too, because as I started reading in the book, I was like, oh, wait, some of these actually have some Southern dialects sort of written in too, which it worked out that I felt it out that way. And it was sort of written that way also. So I feel like it melded really well. Um, as for like how to make each character like keep their voices sounding distinct,
Mhm.
um, in the cases of Ashes and Rubble, especially, I had a character reel. So I had a, a a program open where I record audio, and I had probably 20 different tracks that just had that
Right.
character name and a lead in line. So I would say their lead in line, it would be like, I'm Esteriella. And then I would go in and I would start talking in her voice as I read her line. And so I would use a lead in line for each character to make sure I was keeping my character voices distinct and matching the same voice until I got comfortable enough that I could call them up, without necessarily having to do that.
Awesome. Fascinating. Fascinating. And also, as a narrator, which you think is probably the most difficult to really, I don't want to say hearken to, but difficult to really get around or nail. So, do you find it easier to narrate a book that is immersive and has like a very gripping and compelling atmosphere? Or do you find it easier to narrate a story that appeals to the five senses? Or do you think there's some overlap between the two?
Um, for me, it's really just about how much I am personally connecting with the story. If
Hmm.
it's a story that I'm personally connecting with or I find particularly interesting, I think I'm going to read it a million times better than I would if I read something that I wasn't interested in. So,
Right.
um, as far as like, the five senses and immersion, I think that can change based on what your story's about and those personal connections. But and that's why I try and stick in the fantasy and romantasy genres. And I'm totally love to branch out. Everybody likes a breath of fresh air here and
Mhm.
there. I'd love to do some thrillers. I'd love to do some suspense, what have you. But fantasy and romantasy are my home genres because they're
Right.
what I connect with the most.
Absolutely, very true. And also, as a little plug-in, speaking of genres to branch out in, if you have not listened to Sammy's narration of my next upcoming work, that's gonna be a few years out. I want to say late 26, early 27, The Wolves of Nobunaga. Definitely give it a listen to because Sammy's voice for that um full like 2 minutes and like 40 seconds or something, like the best 2 minutes I've ever heard for like a samurai epic. And Sammy, I just want to give credit where credit's due because you really, really nailed home about the world that people will expect for a setting of 16th century Japan.
I really appreciate that. I really do. And you know what? Like on that topic, just real quick, I
Mhm.
I used to study Japanese a little bit back
Oh,
way back when, I had a friend in college and she was taking the class and I studied alongside her because we lived together. And, we would practice around the house and label things in the apartment. And all of that knowledge I didn't realize would come to play later in life. So like doing
mhm.
that snippet for you. And then I have a book coming up that's also, in a Japanese setting. And I'm
Ooh.
excited to use this knowledge that I randomly gained way back when to nail these pronunciations and nail these names. And that's just really cool to me.
Awesome, awesome. And that kind of goes back to, understanding, where we're like comfortable at, as authors and narrators, we have our genres that we prefer to work in. That's not to say we can't branch out. But going back to what you said about romantic and fantasy being like your bread and butter. So ultimately, Sammy, whenever you're working on a book that falls within those genres and subgenres, what is your goal as a narrator, as well as the promise you're making, not just to the author, but also to the readers, as well as to yourself?
I think for me, it's really just trying to let the story breathe the way that gives the best interpretation that makes you believe it. For me, I want it to feel real and I want it to feel very authentic. Um, and I think again, staying in with works that you're really connecting with really help that because you're able to relate to those emotions and nuances that are happening in the story, and it's not going to feel fake because we're really connecting with these things, with these moments, with these scenes that are happening and portraying them in the most authentic way we can.
Absolutely, 100%. And also, going back to the topic of voices, as you said before, that you always have like a cue that really helps you get back into the headspace of that character. I'm wondering if you ever encountered, at some moments of your narration journey, what I like to call the narrator's block, in the sense of you may have forgotten how that character sounded, or maybe you're working on a new character, but you can't really get the voice or accent right, and that can leave you in a funk. So, have you ever encountered that? And if so, how did you overcome it?
So I had one chapter in Ashes and Rubble where there was a character I was struggling with that
Mm.
I was having trouble coming up with a new voice. I was having trouble making this guy sound more distinct than the 20 other guys I had voiced. Um, and I struggled with him, and I got through the chapter and I kind of put a pin in it. And I was like, I'm going to come back. I'm going to give it another listen. I'm going to play with some voices and I'm going to come back. So I gave it a rest. I gave it a couple days and I came back and I decided I was just going to narrate only his lines with
Mm.
this new voice I had come up with and then edit it the same way you would edit a duet. So I took out all of his old lines. I trashed it. I was like, this guy didn't work. He wasn't doing it justice. But I edited that chapter as a duet. And I feel like taking the time to do that and taking the time to step away and let something breathe and come back to it when you're ready. Don't let yourself fall into a funk. Don't let it
Mhm.
pause your entire, project or put your whole, you know, thing on hold. Just put a pin in it and come back when you're ready. And that's completely okay to do. I still had continued my narration for the rest of that chapter. I still went on and did some other chapters after that, but I came back when I was ready. And sometimes that's how we have to handle it.
Very true, Sammy. And as a little fun segment, this one I'm actually really excited to ask you some fan questions. So, for you, Sammy, what were some of your favorite or fun moments narrating both of those works, as well as some of the most challenging segments to narrate?
Um, okay, one of the most challenging things, and I made a TikTok about this. I don't know if anybody would have seen it, but where I said, sometimes we only have so many voices in us, and if I am
Mhm.
voicing my fifth old man in a book and he sounds like the same old man from another chapter, no, I didn't. You didn't hear that. We're just gonna forgive it and move on. Because sometimes it's true. Sometimes we run out of voices, and sometimes a voice might sound just like another character, but maybe we have to let their personality shine through and let the way that they're carrying themselves be the differentiating factor.
Mhm.
And I know that that can be a struggle because a lot of us wish that we were just absolute chameleons with our voice and could do absolutely anything, but we're human. And you
Yeah.
know what? We support human narrators. So
Yes, absolutely. We do, Sammy. We do. Now, if that was the most challenging segment, what were some of the funnest or your favorite moments for narrating both of those books?
my favorite moment in narrating any book is when you get that chemistry between your characters.
Mm,
Like there was one scene I remember where, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, but
of course.
we'll say a guy was fighting alongside a girl, and this girl didn't have any armor, and she was really, really worried about not having any armor. And he was like, "That's okay. See his greaves? I think they'll fit your shins." And then he goes after the guy, and he's collecting pieces of armor for her off of the enemies that he's felling. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And their little exchanges, there's so much chemistry there. There was a lot of chemistry when, the first time that they flirted and the first time that she sort of let her walls down. And I live for those kinds of chemistry scenes and making those conversations feel like they're really happening right in front of you by two completely different people.
Absolutely. That is very true, Sammy. That is very true. There is something really, really good about, the chemistry you have with characters, whether you are the narrator narrating the characters, or you're the author and writing the character and the scene that they're in. I mean, if you enjoy writing that scene for that character, then you really have developed a strong rapport with that character. And I think the readers are also going to make that connection as well. So now I have a few personal reflective questions that I would like to ask you. So going back to the beginning, to your introduction, after you talked with your husband saying, like, hey, I have something to tell you, I want to hear your thoughts, and you told him that this was something that you wanted to pursue, what about your friends and family? When did you tell them that you were pursuing narration as a career?
So I'm somebody who doesn't really like to be perceived. And so I keep things very quiet for a
Mm,
while before I come out with them. So I believe I had already built my studio. I had already studied everything. I had already been turning in auditions, and I had already completed my first book before I ever said anything to anyone. It was very, very under wraps because I don't know. I don't know if I'm somebody who is just I don't want to make a big deal out of something unless I know that it's going
mm,
to be a thing, you know? I
right,
remember I talked about this with some narrators the other day. My approach over, like, social media when I started narrating, I avoided other narrators, and I only really followed authors and everything because I was, trying to network, but I wanted to prove myself as a
right.
narrator before I introduced myself to other narrators because I wanted to
Mm,
be able to come in and say, "Yes, I am a narrator." And I know I feel like this is maybe controversial because I know with authors, if you haven't released a book yet, we don't say, "Oh, well, you're not an author yet." You absolutely are. And it's the same way with narrators. If you're doing the work, yes, you are a narrator, even if you haven't gotten your first book yet. And I want to say I completely support that. I just personally am very, I feel like I have to prove it to myself first before I
yeah,
can go and tell anybody else that I feel like I belong there. So that's kind of
absolutely.
how I approach it.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with your answer that there are some moments, like even for authors in general that I've had on the show, they've had very similar mindsets where they were already in like the final stages of writing and about to publish their book. That they let their friends and family know, was like, hey, I've been working on this. This is what I've been doing. So yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. And actually, on the topic of social media, that leads into the next question of what it means to be an independent creator in the digital age. Because social media heightens everything to a 100. Because it is a good tool to use to connect with our readers and our fans and to make connections with other narrators or authors. But again, it's a double edged sword because we are exposed ourselves to negative critiques, feedback, trolls, everything, any harmful thing that could be detrimental to a person's mental health and well being. And of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be there. I remember I was talking with, I think it was Daphne, about this question, and she said how for narrators, the industry has changed because in the past, and probably still now, you have actors and film stars who are narrators who are narrating books. And now you have uh, regular people who are making that plunge into the world of narration. They're putting in the time, they're doing the research, and they're honing their skills. But there is still that hesitancy to say, like, as you said, am I really a narrator? So for you, Sammy, throughout your career thus far, have you ever had moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And what has continued to discipline you to be the best narrator you can be?
There was so much in that question. So one of the moments that I had that absolutely made me flip out, because you're right, there are actors who are also narrators. I think Jack Black narrated a book recently,
Hmm.
things like that. My husband one day, because he's a big audiobook guy, and he's
Right.
listened to audiobooks way longer than I have. And he when I first started narrating, I had done my first book. So it was like little tiny baby narrator Sammy did her very first book, and I forget the actor's name, the guy who played Spike on Buffy. I know he does a lot of narration.
Oh, yes, I know the actor. Yeah.
So he looked at me and he was like, "Hey, so he's your peer now. How do you feel about that?" And I was like, "No, no, don't say that. Don't make me flip out. Absolutely not." That was like immediate imposter syndrome for me.
Mm,
But um I think that imposter syndrome is definitely something that we all struggle with. I made a Threads post yesterday talking about it, where I was like, I still have imposter syndrome, but I am noticing that I'm booked out for a while. I have more, work on my plate than I did 6 months ago for sure. And
hmm.
I'm not freaking out about it. I'm not panicking because I know I can handle this. And I think that's some form of growth. um, I think, the growth that we have, what is it? Things that happen that are good are slow.
Mm,
Good change is slow. And, so that growth that we have it's slow going, and we might not notice it as quickly as we might notice when something bad happens. But it's important to recognize it and to call it out when you do see that good growth.
yes, really true. And speaking of good growth, that leads to the next and final of the reflective questions before I get into the business side of being a narrator. And this is probably one of my favorite questions to ask of this segment. And some context for this, Sammy. So, on our last show, Into the Maze, I may have mentioned this or probably did not, but I've been doing this show, The Wandering Scribe, for about maybe 6, 7 years. Originally was on Anchor and then moved over to YouTube. And now with about 400 videos and 177 author interviews, I want to say good, almost 15 narrator interviews, which is crazy. I've learned a lot from a lot of people in this industry. And a lot of them I've noticed have sort of emerged during the COVID years. And there's been this discussion that because of the COVID years, it became a breeding ground. And once things started to change, the floodgates were open and the industry was bombarded with new talent, new authors writing great stories, narrators showcasing their skills, editors building their brand. All of that is incredible. But this leads to a debate of whether or not, because of these new voices, are we in a new age or a golden age? And of course, with the rise of AI entering the publishing industry and many companies turning towards AI for creativity, this has also kind of changed the game a little bit. So to break this into two parts, Sammy, the first part, your opinion, do you feel that there is or that we are in a new age or a golden age?
So I think that you're right that a lot of good came out of people being stuck in their houses with COVID, because we did get a lot of new talent. People were able to explore other options and, unfortunately forced to explore options. But I think
Mhm.
that for a lot of people, you sometimes it takes a kick in the butt to make change, and sometimes those changes are for the better. So I think that it opened up a lot of newer ways for people to look at their lives and look at the way that they were going about their lives and spending their time. And we did get a lot of more creatives out of it.
Mhm. Very
Sim-
true.
Simultaneously, you could call that a golden age, but at the same time, I feel like we have to also kind of hold on to that with tooth and nail right now, because I think
Mm.
that a lot of people have, gone back to normal. A lot of businesses are going back to normal, and it's very expected for you to go back to normal. I think
Yes.
that there are probably a lot of creatives who are somewhat struggling to maintain that newness that they found in that darker time, if that makes sense. So I think, there was a peak,
Mm.
but I think that we really have to, fight for it tooth and nail, because you're right. We have now a lot of greed coming in with AI, and companies wanting to undercut
Mm,
creatives who are hardworking and, doing their best to make a living off of their talents. And these talents are literally being, um, what's the word? I don't know the word, but they're replicating and stealing a
yes.
lot of this talent in very unethical ways, and it's very difficult. I will say I am also an artist, and so I have struggled with, AI in art. Now I'm struggling with AI narration, and there are a lot of books also that get listed for live narrators that you can tell are AI written. And so it's really hitting all of us very
Mm,
hard.
yes, very true. And that leads to the second part is, do you believe that because of AI entering the publishing industry and many companies turning towards AI for for its ability to mass produce a false sense of creativity, that we are in a dark age, so to speak?
I think there's always light and there is always dark. And, it's going to continue. It's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I don't know who is going to finally put on some regulations for this stuff. I really, really
Mhm.
hope that they do it before it gets dangerous. And, you could argue that it already is. It already is dangerous. Um, but I don't want to just say that we're in a dark age. I
Right.
will say that there is darkness. There is definitely things that we need to work against and be better about, but there's also good.
Very true. Very true, Sammy. And this kind of leads into the next set of questions for this final segment, which is the business side of being a narrator, which is probably my favorite segment to ask anyone in the creative industry. So, as a little icebreaker, Sammy, looking back on your career thus far, what were some of the most surprising aspects of being a narrator and working as a voice artist? And is there anything you would have done differently in the beginning of your career?
This is an interesting question. Okay, so one of the most surprising things when when I started looking into narration, of course, everybody, I think pretty much everybody, when they start looking into it, they get directed to ACX, which is the
Mm,
backside of Audible. And ACX has some, introductory videos and informative videos on how to la 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 la. I was under this impression that I got to sit in my booth by myself and make crazy voices and read
mhm,
these stories, and that was it. I did not realize how much of a social aspect there was going to be. It really felt very like, ACX was dad and dad was going to say, "Here's a job," and that was it. I wasn't prepared for having to market myself. I wasn't
mhm.
really prepared for networking. Um, and that surprised me. As far as, what I would do differently, I still really like how I went about things. I still think that that worked for me, but there are a lot of programs out there that talk about, oh, narrator's masterclass and, oh,
Right.
this narrator workshop, whatever, what have you. I never did any of those. And everyone I've talked to, now where I'm like, oh, should I? They're like, it wouldn't benefit you at this point. Most of those classes are for entry level. I think that doing one of those probably would have been really cool because I could have made different connections. I could have possibly gotten to know some people in the industry that way and entered in a with that social aspect in mind and been able
Mhm.
to network better through those initial connections. And again, I started off very closed off. I didn't talk to anybody. I just did my own thing. So I think going back, that would be something I would consider doing, would be, branching out and doing a workshop or doing a master class and seeing what other connections I can make that way and maybe learn things in a different way. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with how I did it either.
Yes, that is also true. That is very, very true. And this idea of a masterclass is something that we are going to be touching on much later. And also, once again, going back to what you said in the beginning about how romantasy and romance fantasy are your bread and butter, this leads to the next question of finding your voice as a narrator. And what I mean by that is just like when it comes to writing a book, there are certain expectations the author has to uh, oblige by. And what I mean by that is each genre has a certain expectation or a certain format that the story is supposed to go. And readers of the genre are going to be expecting that. Now, you don't want your story to be so original that it's going to completely take you out of the story, but you don't want it to be so familiar that it's going to be seen as a carbon copy. And I imagine as a narrator, that's kind of the same things that if you're reading a fantasy book, you're going to be expected to sound a certain way, whether that's for a character or the person who's narrating the whole story. Same thing for romance fantasy. And there's always been this notion that I've seen in other books of like the not copycat, but stereotype casting in terms of like not stereotype character casting of like, oh, we need someone with this type of voice, and they do that same voice for all these subgenres of, let's say, a western or a thriller. Now, I'm very curious for you, Sammy, when you narrate a voice, do you take that into consideration, the expectations the readers and the fans have for said genre, or do you try to read it in a way that you appeal to the readers of the age group that it's belonging to, let's say YA, new adult, and adult fiction? Because even in those categories, if you are, let's say, someone in their mid-20s, it's going to be really interesting listening to a book, but the voice does not match the tone of said book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it makes sense, but I might have a hot take.
Okay.
So I personally am really against copycatting or emulating anybody.
Right.
And here's my reasoning. And
Okay.
this is where I might have a hot take, right? I
Hmm.
think that the great voices that a lot of people recognize for certain genres or certain stories, I don't think that they got there by emulating anyone. I think that, when people reference, say, Teddy Hamilton, oh, we love Teddy Hamilton and the way that he sounds during these romances. But Teddy Hamilton, was he emulating anyone or was he being Teddy Hamilton? You know,
Right.
I personally like to narrate the way that I narrate. And I hope one day maybe I'm recognized because, hey, I like the way Sammy does it. I like
Right.
the way Sami Ro sounds when she does this and that. I want to be recognized for my own voice. Um, I do take in some consideration for different genres, but I feel like at the same time, it's more so just consideration for the story and their characters and what's happening inside that story at the time.
Hmm.
As far as like, casting particularly for like a YA or a romance, that very heavily falls on either the production company or the author.
Yes.
Who am I to tell somebody that I don't feel that my voice sounds the way that their character sounds in their head? If they think that and I'm connecting with their story and I'm connecting with their character and I'm interested in doing it and they do think I'm the right voice for it, that's all that really matters at that point.
Absolutely, absolutely, Sammy. And here are some two other fan questions, but these are completely new for your interview, which I'm very excited to ask. So, if you had to imagine a narrator Mount Rushmore, who would be on your Mount Rushmore for narrators?
Oh no, you can't ask me that. You can't
I
ask
kind of
me
had to
that.
figure. I kind
I
of
would
figured
Can
that
I
was going to
fill it
be.
with my friend narrators? Can we put, let's see, Daphne
Hmm.
Winters and Damian Knight
Yes.
and uh Mariana.
Yes.
There's, I let's raise up some of us who are, not the biggest names and let's get a Mount Rushmore of our crew.
Yes, absolutely. And that actually kind of goes to the next fan question, which is, you worked with a lot of familiar named, and also people who have been on the show. You currently did a duet with Damian Knight, and also, as you mentioned, Daphne Winters and Mariana. Is there anyone in your narrator bucket list that you would love to work with, or even do a duet with?
Mm, I would love to work with actually Lauren Beck. I would love to work
Mhm.
with Lauren one day. Um, hmm. I would love to work with Savannah. Savannah Reeds. I'm she's really, really fantastic. Is it bad that most of my wants are girls? And I'm just like, we can just do all the sapphic romances.
No, that is completely fine. I've had Lauren on Into the Maze. Oh, she is incredible. I've also had Brittany, Heather. Actually, just recently had Jackie and Kyle. They are all incredible as well. But Savannah, that was another name that you mentioned just now, correct? I don't think I've heard of her.
She's amazing. She's the narrator that I mentioned earlier that was my moment. My, "Oh, I can do
Ah,
this" moment. And, I know she goes by she has 2, but I'm trying to remember exactly what her name is for narration. I know it's Savannah, but, oh, she's absolutely wonderful, and I feel like she just has such a smooth voice. It's Savannah Thomas. Okay. Savannah Thomas. She is amazing, and you should look her up because I think she just finished her 100th. I think she's getting up there in, in her, titles under her belt.
absolutely, absolutely. I'll definitely make sure to check her out. And also, for all my viewers and listeners, another plug. If you're also looking for for other narrators, definitely check out the people that we've name dropped as well: Daphne Winters, Damian Knight, Heather, Brittany, Lauren, Kyle, Luke, and many, many more. They are incredible individuals as well. And that kind of goes into the discussion of networking because, name dropping all these people, we are able to do so because we've networked with them. We've got a chance to work with them and meet them in person or video or anything in the way. And I think networking is very huge for independent creators. It is a lifeline. So, for you, Sammy, in your opinion, how important is it for independent creators to really begin networking? And in addition to all the people that we've mentioned, are there any other people you'd like to give a shout out to that you've either worked with or have helped you along the way?
Oh, there's so many people. I know Hell and Zach,
Yes.
Carmen. I don't know, did we mention Amber? Amber's really awesome. Amber does
Oh, how could we
audio.
forget about Amber?
Um, I feel like we could really just go like on and on and on.
Mhm.
Um, Everly Woods, she's really great. But I feel like networking, it it is important,
Mhm.
but it yes it is and yes it isn't. I feel
Okay.
okay. I know. Here I go with the hot takes.
No,
Um,
these are really good. I love like differing opinions on these questions. So yeah, feel free, go ahead.
so networking can be really beneficial, and anytime. Oh, Brandon Francis narrator, and there's also the good sir. I forget what he's going by now. But I believe his name is also Brandon. He's wonderful. Sorry, had to
No
mention
problem.
that. But I feel like networking is really, really a fantastic thing. One, you don't feel as alone when you're
Hmm.
working, which because this is a very isolating job.
Yes.
Anytime that you're working from home, I feel like you really need that social aspect. But also, you can help each other with resources and connections and, alert each other to casting calls and alert each other to different workshops that are going on and this and that, what have you. It's fantastic. However, I think a lot of the time too that we can get swept up in networking and we can get swept up in being social and maybe getting involved in too many things. I know that there's
Mm.
different events that go on that we love doing our events. We've got human voices only,
Yes.
love. We've got fem
Hmm.
audio takeover,
Hmm.
love. But like recently, I had to take a step back and not participate in an event because I was bogged down with work and I really just needed to concentrate on my work. And, and that's okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, yes, networking is great and it can be really useful, but you have to be getting your work done. You have to be buckling down and making
Mm.
sure that you're not getting too swept up in being social, that you're not getting in your auditions, that you're not booking out, that you're, maybe not getting things done in time. That's really, really important. You don't need to take on too much extra stress,
Yes.
especially because I know we all want to be a part of everything and we all want to be present everywhere all the time, but we can't. And so I feel like, just remaining conscious of that, and that, it's okay if you need to take a step back and not be as social because you're getting your work done. People will be there later. That is okay too.
Yes, that is absolutely true. That does make a lot of sense. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And as we near the end of this incredible narrator interview, there are two final questions. And the second to last question, this one is more of a little role play. Now, as you mentioned earlier about the narrator master classes, I think those are very, very important because definitely I feel just like being an author, people think being a narrator is, as you said, being in a recording booth, making funny voices, and just waiting for the auditions to come to you. And that's not always the case. And also, just like being an author, there is no guarantee that you're going to be either picked up for the book, or the book that you narrate is going to be a success. And down this path, just like being an author, there are two: to be a narrator and to be known as a narrator. One is dedicated to the craft and the art, the other is dedicated to the business side, the marketing aspect. And there are so many seminars and workshops that talk about these things. So, Sammy, let's imagine this scenario. Let's say you were invited by a colleague. Let's say Daphne invited you out to host or even co-host a workshop or seminar. And in that seminar, the audience is filled with aspiring new narrators, as well as authors wanting to work with narrators. In the pool of topics you both could talk about, what would be the one that you would be most happy to discuss, and also leave the audience with a pearl of wisdom?
What would I be happiest to discuss and leave them with a pearl of wisdom?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. um, I would say, as far as like maintaining, or not maintaining, but being able to fight your imposter syndrome
Yes.
and find your voices, I think maybe just talking to them about not letting fear stop you from doing what you enjoy. As
Yes.
cliche as that may sound, I think that a lot of the time when we work in narration, we're
Mm.
making a lot of decisions that, we don't necessarily have guidance on. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we know what the author is expecting. Sometimes we don't.
Yes.
Sometimes we're thrust into it and we have to make the best decisions that we can. But I think staying, keeping everybody else's expectations out of your head a bit and allowing your own creativity to breathe, I think might be one of the most important parts of the process.
Very true. Very, very true, Sammy. And now we arrived at the final question. And this is another really cool fan question. And they ask, Sammy, it is very clear that you are very passionate about your job and you have a good idea of your audience in both romance, fantasy, and fantasy, as well as wanting to branch out into other genres down the road. Ultimately, what do you want people to take away from your performances in every project that you've been part of, as well as the 2 projects that you've just mentioned?
I just want them to be able to be whisked away into the world of fantasy and feel all of that magic and hope and love and adventure that fantasy brings. That is my number one goal, is to just
Mhm.
let people really have that escape and believe in all those wonderful things that stories like that let us believe in.
Very true, Sammy. And a beautiful way to end this amazing narrator interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing episode. A huge thank you to my friend Sammy for coming on the show, making her official debut here on the Wandering Scribe. And as I said before, if you want to hear Sammy's narration of my upcoming book in the future, The Wolves of Nobunaga, make sure to go to my YouTube channel, or I will link it down below. Sammy, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? Do you have any upcoming projects that you would like to share besides the ones that you mentioned in the interview? And if an author wants to reach out and possibly work with you, where can they fill out a form?
So I'm anywhere social. You can find me under Sami Ro Audio. Um, that Instagram, TikTok, anywhere else I might exist. Um, and I do have an author inquiry form for audiobooks on my bio site, which is linked under my Instagram page. Um, but upcoming projects, I have The Knowing Witch. I have A Witch in Isenshire, which is actually a sequel
Ooh.
to my first book that I did, which was A Witch in the Lighthouse. So
Ooh.
that's book 2. And then I've got 2 other projects coming later. Well, one's later this year and one's at the beginning of next year that I can't announce yet because they haven't been announced yet, but I am so excited about them. So a lot of
Awesome.
things in the works.
That's great. That's really great to hear, Sammy. I'll link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing episode here on the show. A huge thank you to my friend Sammy for coming on the show. And if you'd like to see Sammy in another special, say the Writers Hub, in an all narrator panel with people like, some familiar faces like Amber, Damien, Luke, Daphne, Heather, Brittany, Lauren, Kyle, and many more. And of course, Sophia Dujardin, the Red Queen herself, comment down below. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all episodes coming out soon. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the next episode.